we doing with that?
I can do video on.
Okay. I'll just put
Um,
it on and then whatever you guys want to do.
yeah. No,
What do
it's
you,
good. I need clips. This would help.
yeah, so welcome back, like and subscribe. I think we've got a good bit of stuff going on, and I'll hand it over to Austin. But yeah, so we're doing another foreign policy episode. And so Austin, what's kind of been going on in your neck of the woods, and what have you been kind of observing, especially with what's going on in the Middle East and elsewhere?
Main thing I've been watching this past week, and I've been keeping kind of you posted on it. We're seeing a lot of the same movements we saw back in like May and June before everything kicked off with Iran and Israel. Um, so term like kind of walk everybody through it. So like the first thing that me and Andrew picked up on, and we both kind of discussed it, was the USS Ford carrier group. Originally, they were saying it was getting deployed to Europe, and they actually posted some pictures of it near Norway. And then, like a day or two later, all of a sudden, it's like entering the Mediterranean, which, if anybody knows, is pretty much an impossible rate of speed for that ship. So, what ended up coming out from like Norwegian like news and stuff, it turned out they had lied, and the carrier had left Norway like almost a week earlier. So they kind of snuck a carrier group into the Mediterranean. All of a sudden there was several days last week me and Andrew tracked it. There was multiple, like how many was it? I think it was like 30. I think it was at least 20, or maybe like close to 30 tankers all of a sudden moved from like the continental
Yeah.
United States to like Europe, and then all of a sudden they were in the Middle East. And there's been like several dozen, I think. I want to say it's close to 100 fighters, which is again pretty much like what we saw back in like June and May and stuff, getting moved to the Middle East. So we're seeing carriers, we're seeing large like movement of like airplanes. And then finally, like the other thing that we picked up on was there was a lot of like sudden like transport to like Israel, and like there was like air defense sites are getting expanded again, which is another pretty big tip off. And then on the flip side, like the Iranians been, like they've been very public. They think this is like a build up against them, and then there's been like the Russians have been sending stuff there. I think I saw the Chinese may have started sending stuff. So it seems like both sides are definitely doing kind of a build up in the region. So that does seem like that's going to kick off very soon again. And Venezuela, there's not been, I wouldn't say there's been a huge amount, but there's definitely been, the last time me and Andrew did an episode, like we were kind of discussing it, like there were signs that like special forces may have been operating. And now we kind of got confirmation that's been going on. There's been a lot of reports that like the U.S. is talking to like potential defectors in like their military. So, I mean, there's definitely a lot going on. And then finally, with like Russia and Ukraine, there was last couple of days. There's been some pretty big escalations. The U.S. is contemplating like giving like direct intelligence to the Ukrainians for like strikes inside Russia. They've what was it, Tomahawks? I think there was like another missile system they were thinking about sending
Yep.
to them. And then finally, there was I think it was one oil tanker got seized off the coast of like I believe it was France by the French. So definitely a lot going on this past like couple of weeks.
So I was meaning to ask you this, but it was kind of hard to do like over text. So, you know, if you just look at this globally, right? Okay, Trump's saying, hey, we're gonna, like you said, we're sending stuff to Ukraine, we're gonna help them out, we're gonna do all that kind of stuff. And then it's okay, we're obviously still sending stuff to Israel, all that. You got the aircraft carrier that's coming in. Excuse me. And so you got that going in there, and then you've got what he's doing in Venezuela. So I'm like, okay, like if you objectively look at like the axis of evil, right? You've got Iran, Russia, China, North Korea, Iran. I probably already mentioned them, and then maybe some smaller states here and there, right? So what I don't understand is it's like, okay, so you're doing everything in the Middle East with Iran, so you're kind of building up against them. You're building up against Venezuela, which was one of the ones I didn't mention. Then you're building up against Russia by putting stuff into Ukraine. It's like, first off, will there be a buildup in China? I don't think there will be. But it's like, okay, so like a lot of this is you feeling like you're like either is it you building up to like show strength, or is it you're building up to show potential uh outcomes, if you want to call it that, right? Like, okay, are you building up to kind of like what Biden did after Russia invaded Ukraine, right? Are you sending in troops? You're going to bring in more troops to kind of like a show of force, like, hey, we're committed, everything like that? Or is this like, hey, if we end up going to war with China, Russia is going to be, probably back, back with them. So we need to kind of push that. Same thing with Iran. Same thing with, you know, uh, uh, some of the Venezuela. Like, is that kind of what's going on? Is it coordinated? Is it kind of part of a strategy, or is it like, hey, we're just kind of, trying to deploy as much as we can to kind of show force? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, it's the sense
Because
I get.
here's what I initially thought. I was like, let's go back to basically the, multipolar, but really bipolar world, right? China and United States. You know, what really set off us and almost brought us to the brink of war was the spying as well as Cuba. And so it almost made me think, okay, is is that kind of like why we're not seeing anything against China, right? We're not sending more shit to Taiwan, right? Because we don't want to kind of have that flip side where then that just is super escalatory. Like, is it kind of mindful, or is it maybe that's going to be coming here soon?
I mean, there has been some like reports on China as far as like I can't remember if it was New York Times or Washington Post. It was one of those had like an article a couple of days ago, and I think I sent it to you, but I can't remember. It was like they're saying like a sudden escalation, like they're building of like dual use transports, like sea transports, which could
Hmm.
be used for like an invasion. Like probably like I think it was more like those. I think people call them bridge boats. That's not the technical term for them, but I just cannot think of the actual technical term off the top of my head. But it's basically like it's one of the ships that basically it looks like a giant bridge on top of it, and it basically builds a
Yep, I know
causeway.
what you're talking about.
Okay, so they're seeing more of those get built, and then there was something that came out the other day from I think it was uh it's like one of those major British think tanks that was like, okay, like apparently like the Russians signed a deal with the Chinese, and they're like doing like a tech transfer, like stuff for like airborne operations or sea operations, just kind of like technology the Russians have that the Chinese didn't, so they're kind of sharing it with them. So I mean,
Hmm.
there is definitely like a capacity for it. I mean, if anybody's paid attention,
But they've got the relationships there, but they're not deploying anything, right? That's kind of what I'm trying to get at. Is it's like I mean, we've known for 3 years that China, Russia, North Korea, Russia, Iran have relationships
yeah,
that they're utilizing, but we're not seeing anything yet where it's a direct like, hey, China, like you're coming in on this too, you know?
yeah, it's so far it seems like they mostly limited themselves to like material support. Like there has been like we tracked it back when it like the first like war back in the summer was fought with like the Chinese sending transport aircraft and stuff. So I mean, you're still seeing stuff like that, but it doesn't seem like it's going to be like a direct. And there was reports that like the Chinese were probably going to sell the Iranians like their air defense systems, like their HQ-9 systems. I mean, I could definitely see stuff like that. I haven't seen any signs as far as like if you attack Iran, China's going to attack Taiwan or stuff. So no, I haven't seen that
Mhm.
yet. But
Well, and it also makes me think like, okay, is China basically 1930s, 33, whatever. Um, it might be more like 1935, 36, something like that. USA, where it's kind of like, okay, England and France are the Russia and the Iran to us, where it's like, and then Venezuela's the Poland, right? Where it's like, hey, we're gonna go and invade Venezuela and do stuff there, and then Iran and Russia are gonna come in and back them, and then China's gonna supply them until it gets to the point where it's like you're basically a co-belligerent. Like, is that kind of where this will go? Because if it does, then it's like, hey, if that means we're Germany, right?
yeah,
And like that didn't work out very well. Like, is that something we should be concerned about, or is that parallel there?
it's I definitely think they'll supply them. I don't know if China and Russia, for that matter, would be willing to be like. I kind of feel like we've kind of reached the point where like the difference between then and now is like the nuclear weapons issue, because that is such a thing in the background. It's kind of like, okay, like you got to keep that in mind. So it's like I could definitely see them, like, say the U.S. gets into like a conflict with Venezuela and Iran. I mean, it's possible. Like I could see the Russians and the Chinese kind of making that like our Ukraine, because it's like, okay, you guys are, you've been having fun in Ukraine against the Russians. Well, now we get to have fun in Venezuela against you, or we get to have fun in Iran against you. So I mean, like, I doubt either of them would intervene for Venezuela that hard in terms of like going to war for them. But like Iran, it's kind of more iffy because like the Iranians do have a lot closer relationship with the Russians, and the Chinese definitely do have like a pretty close like energy relationship with the Iranians. Because
Yeah.
I do think Beijing has a sense of like, okay, like obviously this Iran Israel thing, it's kind of issue specific to them, but there's definitely kind of the kind of, guess you could say, the backdoor issue of being like, well, we buy a lot of oil from Iran, so that we do kind of have to stop and realize, okay, like this could also be like a play directed against us too. So
Yeah. Well, and with Iran, I don't think anyone has ever mentioned boots on the ground. Like that's always what's made that different. Was it's like, okay, in Ukraine, like that would be, Russian troops and Ukrainian troops. In Venezuela, that'd be us in Venezuela. But it's like no one's talking about invading Iran. You know what I
yeah,
mean? And I feel like that's one thing that kind of separates it apart because it's like, you know, it's all like, hey, we're gonna have to bomb them or people are gonna have to revolt. Like we're not going in and marching in the streets to
yeah,
get these people out like we would in Caracas. You know what I mean? Like that's the difference. And I
mhm,
always that's why I always never understood why it's like, okay, you're gonna go like I mean, obviously you know this. It's like, okay, well, Israel, but it's like, okay, yeah, but really, like, what's like? There's got to be some other reason than this, where it's like, why of all the places you want to pick fights, you want to pick fights in the place where you're not really going to gain anything from it. Like why
yeah.
Iran? You're not going to gain anything from fighting them.
Yeah, it really does seem like it's just a thing to kind of prop up like regional proxies, and then
Hmm.
too, it's like I said, like there's definitely that issue, and like China has made that very clear that like that in itself is kind of like a thing that concerns them. But then it's like I just said, there's also just the element of like, if nothing else, just from a pure interest perspective, like they get a lot of oil from Iran, so there's kind of that like, okay, like we really don't want them taking out our oil supply. I mean, they still have Russia, so they'd be fine, but it's also just like you still, you know what I mean? Like you want to keep your options open and keep, as much as you can get. So
Well, and with Venezuela, I mean, where's their oil going?
yeah, that too.
I mean, I don't know. I mean, I imagine it's going to China, right? But it's like, and some other third worlds or developing countries.
Yeah,
But it's like, okay, but like, it's probably not kind of like what you're saying. It's probably not the one that's going to China. It's probably Iran and Russia, and
yeah,
Venezuela's like a third, fourth tier supplier at that point.
yeah. So it's definitely kind of like a level up with like Iran, and then too. It's just like Iran has. It's kind of almost like how we have like regional allies. It's basically their version of that, because I mean, Iran has like 90 million people. It's fairly populous. It's got a lot of capabilities. It definitely ties down a lot of like U.S. resources. So if you're looking at it from like a Moscow or a Beijing perspective, but it's also just like, even leaving aside the economic considerations, it's like the more they can kind of like stretch us out, that kind of benefits them, because it's like, if like we've got an entire, like our most advanced carriers now in the Middle East because of this. That's one carrier they don't have to worry about.
So, and someone brought this up, and I don't remember if we brought it up when we spoke. What about Cuba? Like why are we kind of just ignoring Cuba and going straight to Venezuela? Like why don't we just go get Cuba and then kind of like use that to kind of springboard out from there? I mean,
It
God
is.
knows we all know Marco Rubio doesn't like Cuba, but I
Oh
mean,
yeah.
I mean, it's why I'm like, okay, like wouldn't that be the more logical choice?
If I had to take a guess, as soon as you said that, something I probably should have mentioned before, we do know for a fact the Chinese have bases in Cuba. So
Yeah.
that could be kind of like a getting too on the nose. Like, as far as we know, there's no actual bases, excuse me, in Venezuela, but like there is definitely at least. I know there was a thing like a couple of years ago. They found there was at least like one Chinese like intelligence site there, and there's possibly more. So it's kind of like, you invade Cuba, you're putting several hundred to possibly a few thousand Chinese soldiers and the crosshairs and that could really escalate things. I think that's kind of part of it. But then there's also kind of like a lot of Venezuela's oil goes to Cuba. Venezuela and Cuba have very close relationships, so it's kind of like I guess you kind of call it like domino theory in a sense. It's like, okay, if we can take out Venezuela, that would probably at that point be enough to push Cuba over the edge because Cuba's not doing great either.
That's what I'm saying. Is they're not in the strongest hand
Yeah.
themselves.
So it's probably a situation where they're like, okay, if we can just take out Venezuela, that would probably make both of them. We get Venezuela, and that would probably be enough to tip Cuba over. And it's probably, like I said, there's probably the element of just like, well, we really can't invade Cuba because the Chinese are there, but if we can invade Venezuela, that makes Cuba collapse. 2-for-1 kind of deal is what I'm kind of speculating.
But I mean, doesn't that further embolden the buildup that would occur in Cuba?
In terms of like the Chinese,
Mm-hmm.
it's possible. I mean, it's definitely something to watch. I haven't seen anything publicly yet in that regard, but
Well, and I know you and I talked about this, where it's like the push in Venezuela is most likely the oil reserves, and having that as like an additional supply, you got to go through all the different refining, you got to go do all that kind of crap.
yeah,
But in terms of number of reserves, then like yeah, like having that is like an addition to what we have already with us, Canada, potentially European, and then Middle Eastern countries, where it's like, okay, having that kind of like takes out one of the probably weakest links in
yeah,
the American war economy, where it's like, hey, we got Venezuela, and we already got Exxon there, and we just got to kind of start moving our stuff down there. Then we don't have to worry about the oil issue. We're good on that, and we can take that out of a weapon. Whereas, like what you mentioned, where with Iran, where it's like, hey, what is it, the Strait of Malacca? It's like, hey, if you stop that, then you really kind of put a hamper on China, and then that's why they're building those pipelines to kind
yeah,
of just move it over there directly to where it's kind of like that, where it's like, hey, here's their weakness. And then it's like, okay, well, we're trying to, obviously, defend against what our weaknesses are and exploit theirs. And they're trying to do the same.
yeah.
And maybe
It's
that's Venezuela just gets caught up in it, and it's like, hey, you're just part of grand strategy at this point.
and one thing I just thought about. I don't think we've ever mentioned before. So like right before the June War, the Chinese and the Iranians opened like this new. I think it was. I know it was a railway, but it also may have been a pipeline. It was kind of like a dual thing. I think, if I remember correctly, for like oil shipments, and it was completely over land. It was in like May. Like it was literally like I want to say it was like May 23rd or something like that. So it was literally like basically like 2 weeks before like the start of that conflict. So I mean, very very interesting timing, I would say, in that regard.
Hmm. Um, so kind of shifting back towards the Middle East, one thing I saw, I think it was today, where I think it's interesting is that the Russian, I mean, we knew this, right? The Russian Black Sea and Mediterranean fleets are like non-existent basically at this point, right? They've been destroyed and injured, and so the Syrian switchover happened. Where really the only threats the United States would face is in the Pacific in terms of naval. It's not like they really got to worry about Russia and their naval assets in the West. And so I thought about that kind of interestingly in that, like, you know, everyone, you basically have to worry about China's navy and going against, depending on how you deploy it and everything like that, basically what, six, CSGs, right? And it's like I think America would win that, and so I think there's that kind of advantage to where, I also was thinking that maybe that carrier strike group being in the Mediterranean was probably just like a show of force in some way, right? Like, hey, we can attack over here in the Middle East, but we can also attack over in Ukraine from those, those aircraft carriers in the Middle East. So when when I think about this deployment, I think about it almost kind of like, yeah, it's directed towards the Middle East, but I think at the same time it kind of sends a signal up towards Russia, where it's like, hey, we can easily move our assets up there, you know?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Well, and that's why I was just like, and that, like I said, that's why I was like, going from probably hanging around Cyprus or Crete or something like that. It's like, okay, you just got to go left and you're up in the Black Sea. And one of the biggest issues that Ukraine's always had was um, aircraft. And they that's why they always wanted the F-16s, all that kind of good stuff. And where it's like, hey, the United States is going to put up an aircraft carrier group. That would probably change the tide a little bit in Ukraine if it ever got to that point. You know,
Right.
so when you think about the Middle East, how much of what's going on with Iran, we also need to be thinking about with Pakistan and India, since we've kind of been isolating them a little bit more recently.
Uh, I mean, there was that like, I think it was like the Saudis and them announced they had like a pact, the Pakistanis and the Saudis. So I mean, there definitely is like a connection there, and in the
Hmm.
terms of just like Pakistan's obviously making some moves. They're kind of, India's been making its moves. So I wouldn't say like it's likely they'd get involved in anything, but they're definitely like, especially the Pakistanis is like a Muslim power, being the only like nuclear power in the Muslim world. It's
Hmm.
kind of like it does kind of give them a certain leverage or certain leeway, I guess. So back in the summer, the Pakistanis seemed to more kind of side with the Iranians, and now they kind of seem to be having like a, maybe not necessarily pro U.S. term, but more of kind of like a pro or neutral. Because like Pakistan is not on good terms with Israel, but it is good on good terms with like us, and they're on good terms with like the other like Muslim powers. So
Hmm.
they're
And
kind of,
China,
I would
right?
do what?
And China, right?
Yeah, Pakistan's very interesting. Like they love to play they play the middleman a lot. That
Yeah.
those they're kind of like Turkey in that regard. Um, so yeah, there's definitely been a lot of signaling. Turkey and Egypt. I don't know if Pakistan's publicly saying anything, but like given the pact they have with the Saudis, like you can kind of guess where they're kind of leaning. But they're trying to like, Egypt, Turkey, and all them are trying to get like Gaza to like kind of sign that deal that like Trump's proposing, and then Turkey also, I think it was yesterday or today, announced they were going to be putting some sanctions on the Iranians.
Hmm.
So there's definitely some deal making behind the scenes going on. You could definitely tell there's been some more leveraging on that.
Now, with this strike group coming into the Middle East, was that the one that's originally based out of Europe?
It's the Ford group, so I'm not sure. I know they got sent to Norway. Um,
Mhm.
we don't typically station any carriers like on a permanent basis up there. Like,
Well, I thought they do in Italy.
yeah, they sometimes station stuff in Italy. I think it's
But that's what I'm saying. So that's Europe, and
yeah,
then there's the one in, I think, was it Doha, where the
yeah.
other
They do have a
group
naval
is, and
base
that's
in
why I was
Doha.
like, okay,
Yeah.
so when they bring in one, they've actually got probably two there, right?
I would have to check. So
Okay.
usually the way the U.S. works is we keep carriers in, I think it's San Diego on the West Coast and Newport News or Norfolk out in Virginia, where they got the big naval base there.
Hmm.
That's the two main bases. But then we also have like a permanent deployment point in Japan and I mean they could stop in a lot of other places, but in terms of like facilities and stuff, I think it's mainly Japan and then the East and West Coast. I do think they have. I know they station like marine amphibious groups like Spain and Italy. I don't know if there's a carrier permanently stationed there. I don't think so, but like there is like places they do station it, like for deployments, kind of. So I don't think they would put one in Doha just because it's like right across the Persian Gulf. And when the war kicked off last time, they pretty much evacuated everything out of Qatar. So I don't think they would station anything there. But like putting it in like like off the coast of Israel. I mean that's since it's
So yeah, so I currently looked it up. So they've got one in the they got the Nimitz in the Arabian Sea,
okay.
the Theodore Roosevelt in the Philippine Sea, and then the Gerald R. 4. It says deployed in the Atlantic, so it's probably now it's down over there in the middle
Yeah. Look,
Mediterranean. Um, and then they had one doing workups, undergoing pre-deployment workups in the Atlantic. So
What
they've
is
got,
that?
it sounds like they've got two in the Middle East
Yeah.
with potentially additional ones, like you said, Japan, California, and all and Norfolk.
So
So
what?
that's interesting because
Yeah.
it kind of goes back to what you were saying is where the last time we saw two strike groups come into the Middle East was kind of during the whole
Yeah.
ramp up with Gaza and Iran.
When there was, so they didn't turn, it didn't turn to a full scale war, but like there was those two like one night kind of battles between Israel and Iran back in 2024. There was one in April, and I think the other one was in October. So we stripped like, so what they did last, like when that happened, they did. I don't think they did it back in June, but I did. I'm pretty sure they did it back last year. They had two groups already on scene, which kind of fits with what they're doing right now. But then they also, I know they pulled at least another one off of duty and pulled it in the region because there was like a big thing back in 24 because there was like a solid like, I want to say it was like 5 months. Like it was kind of extreme because this was like, it was kind of a big deal. It's like we have no carriers in the Pacific right now because there are things like in the Middle East.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like we're kind of seeing it like the same thing with June. There's two already on scene, and then if they really need it, they could probably pull the Roosevelt out the Pacific, and then they could probably expedite that other one that's working up. So you could potentially see four, and that would basically mean like our entire like active carrier fleet would be in the Middle East because I think right now we have. Correct me if I'm wrong. It's 10 or 11. I'm thinking it's 11. So
Carriers?
yeah, like 11. I think 11. If you don't count like the amphibious assault ships, I think there's 10 or 11 like actual like Nimitz and Ford class carriers active. So typically you've got like
Thought we
five
only
to.
had like eight.
No, we got like it's last I checked it was 10 or 11. They're getting ready to retire the Nimitz. That's why I'm not. I can't remember what the exact amount is off the top of my head.
Let's
But
see.
so usually we have between 4 and 6 active, and then like the others are like in port, like they're either having to get like refueled or repairs or overhauls or some. They're working on, so they're really kind of not available on like a short term basis.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, I mean, potentially they could pull all four of those into the region. That's definitely possible, and we've seen them do that before. It's kind of my point with that.
So one thing I was looking up while you were talking was so I mentioned there was that one aircraft carrier. You might think this is interesting because it kind of goes to what you're saying. You know how they had that one aircraft carrier that had to do those evasive actions with the Houthis?
I think it was the Truman, yeah,
Yep, so that's the one. So yeah, it says undergoing pre-deployment workups in the Atlantic. I almost went thinking like upgrades and probably
yeah.
fixing it everything from since then. But it made me think like, okay, so like say you fix it up, where are you going? You're going right back out into the Middle East. So
And
then you're gonna have like what you're talking about going on.
and the reason that they're like having to do so many repairs for it when everything like started off in the Middle East, like they were on station there. They extended their deployment like 2 or 3 times. It was like a huge deal because like those guys were. I want to say that they were supposed to be like on a 6 month deployment and it ended up being like a year and a half or something.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like that's probably what they're taking so long to get like worked up. It's just like a year, like over a year of just like continuous action against the Houthis or the anti-Iran stuff. I mean, it's that ship has definitely seen a lot of combat.
So there are 11 aircraft carriers, not
Okay,
including the amphibious assault ships, and then the Navy's supposed to have 12.
yeah. So they're actually. See, what's crazy about the Nimitz, and this is one thing that's had all the sailors spooked, is the Nimitz is supposed to be the first Nimitz class carrier to get retired. And so this is like it's supposed to be it's like final like service year or and there has been talk of like extending it, but like that carrier got like I think it got commissioned in like 1968. So I mean it's
It might have. I think I was looking at this a while back, and it was like that's a Vietnam level
yeah,
aircraft carrier.
and they literally ran the socks off that carrier, but they're like so desperate to have because we were already supposed to have I think it was at least another Ford class carrier in commission, and they were supposed to have another one pretty close to being done, and they got like really super behind on that. So like the Ford was the first Ford carrier to get finished. I know it was like several years behind schedule.
Oh yeah.
So that's that's one of the big issues the carrier fleet's having right now. Like a lot of these carriers are just like so old they need to be replaced, but they just don't have the replacements ready yet. So it's kind of like, damned if you do, damned if you don't kind of situation.
Yeah. The Nimitz was 68.
I knew it was old. I thought it
Yeah,
was
I mean it
68.
was old as shit. Um, yeah, let me see, because I thought they had another Nimitz that's supposed to be coming out here soon. Let me see. I thought it was like the
I think it
JFK or
was,
something.
yeah, so I think it's the next Ford class, I think, is the
Yeah,
JFK. And then
here it is. Yeah,
I
it's
think
the
that,
JFK, and it's in fitting out,
okay, so at least it's getting somewhere now.
and
Is
it's scheduled to replace the Nimitz, like you said.
Yeah. I think after that, isn't it like the Enterprise or something?
Yeah, it's the Enterprise.
Finally we can get Captain Picard out there.
Yeah, I know. They need to put it to rest. But it's interesting because they've got that one. The scheduled date for commission is 2029. So it's
Dang.
interesting that you've then got right after the next one is supposed to be ready in 2027, the JFK. Then you go into the Enterprise, which is two. So it's interesting. Hmm.
So they're probably going to have to extend the Nimitz out to 27 then. Like that
Well,
was,
that's I'm thinking. Okay, you're going to add the JFK. That gets you up to 12. But then if you get rid of the Nimitz, then you're down to 11. So I think they're going to have to keep it.
yeah, because I know last year there was a lot of talk about extending the Nimitz for like at least another couple of years, but
Yeah.
you're kind of reaching the point where that ship is just so old. It's like, like especially like these, so where it's nuclear powered, these reactors, I mean, like in theory you can run them like as far as like fuel and stuff forever, but the problem is like the containment vessel after like what is that, almost like 60 some years of use, it's like you're starting to run into like structural issues with it.
Well, not only that, but with these aircraft carriers, it's like, okay, the Nimitz was probably the flagship at one
Yeah.
point, and now it's basically like you're saying, like if you're going to move three or four aircraft carriers to the Middle East, like say you move the Truman over, or let's say you've got the Ford and the first one, then it's like really that the Nimitz is just kind of like a support ship. It's just kind of like it throws some extra bodies out there, but it's like it can't be out there running operations on its own. You're not going to get anywhere near the firepower, and so you're basically just relegating it to medium and low level operations and support.
Yeah. And then I do know I think it was, they were having issues, I think, with like even their water system at this point. Cause it's like, I mean, everything on that ship is just so old. And then once they get close to the end of the life, it's like, do we really want to spend like money to like replace this system if we're going to retire the ship in like 5 years anyway? So
Yeah.
they're kind of running into issues with that. And it's like, they're going to have to figure something out. Two, another huge like limiting factor with like carriers is like we have like 11 carriers, but we only have like nine what they call carrier air wings. So like
Mm, I know
even
what
if
you
we,
mean.
so yeah, I never understood why we did it like that. You would think you'd have more, you think you'd have more carrier air wings than vice versa, but so like we could in theory have all 11 carriers in service and action, but we'd only have like nine of them with actual like planes on them. So it's kind of
Hmm.
like it's a really weird. I think that was kind of like when they cut defense spending after the Cold War, if I remember correctly. But it's like, oh, that's definitely something that they got to get fixed because it's like I said, like what's the point of having you know not enough planes for your carriers? I mean, it kind of defeats the whole purpose.
Well, you also got to remember. I mean, I always look back to the Civil War. I mean, this is a great example. World War II, like that, was definitely like this. You'll hear stories, but it's like, you've got the peacetime military ranks, and then it's like an organization, and then it's like then you got the wartime, where yeah, they'd say, okay, everybody's getting their own strike group and all this other kind of stuff. You're going over there, you're going over there. If you're normally a captain, you're probably going to be a major now, yada yada yada. Like they'll organize it into the way that they see the need.
Yeah. Uh,
um but kind of going back to you know these developments, right? I mean, and I'm kind of looking at Ukraine on this, and maybe we can end with this. You know, Trump initially said he wasn't going to send anything uh to Ukraine, right? He was going, hey, I want to end this war. We don't need to be helping them out. And so now he's willing to send Tomahawks. You mentioned the other missiles, and I think there was also talk of potentially sending him jets, right? And so my question is what what is the reason why you see such an about face? Is it just him being like realistic about it? Or do you think it was kind of like um, he kind of knew all along he was going to do it like this? Do you know what I mean?
That's a really good question, and I went back and forth on that myself. I that is, I will give them credit in the sense that like they've made it so convoluted, it's really hard to tell what their actual intentions were from the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, I really don't know on that. I
Because
mean,
but my opinion is like Trump was like, hey, like, yeah, we're gonna like obviously let's negotiate, but if we can't negotiate, we're gonna do something. We're gonna go back and go harder. And I think and I think he kind of wanted the out, right? It's like, hey, look, I negotiated and he said fuck off. So now I'm going in, you know?
yeah. I have seen a lot of like Russians like say that was kind of what like, and to their defense they were always kind of consistent. They've always, I saw quite a few were like, we really don't think this is going to go anywhere. Like we really don't think it's going to lead to a deal. It'll probably lead to like some sort of like escalation later on. So I mean, like that was their kind of perspective, and I guess from their point of view, it probably does look like that. Uh, but then like the one thing that kind of stops me, it's like, when him and Zelensky had that whole huge like argument in the Oval Office. I mean,
Yeah, it's like what was that then?
yeah, it's from what I have heard from people that are like staffers in the administration or whatever, like kind of lower level people, there is a really huge tendency they will like the administration kind of goes with like the last thing they heard in the sense of like, well,
Oh
it
yeah,
was
I've
fun.
heard that.
Yeah. So I mean, like, okay, you've heard that too. So it's not just like a me hearing that thing. Like, it's
No, dude. I
very
mean, Joe Manchin was sitting there saying he like begged him. He's like please. He's like make sure. He's like please let me be the last person you talk to before you make a decision. Because
I
he
had
they
not heard that.
knew
Okay.
they knew they're like whatever the last person he heard, that's what he's gonna do.
And I've heard that from quite a few like lower level staffers. It's like, okay, whoever he talked to last is kind of, so it's like, before he went in that meeting, it was probably Vance was the last person he talked to back in February. And then now, he's been meeting with Zelensky a lot, so maybe that's kind of been kind of like the influence. But it's like, it just kind of going back to what I said. They've been so convoluted on this whole thing. It's really hard to tell what the intent was. I do think like we never really got any sort of details of what the offer was. Like I don't recall, like there was bits and pieces leaked, but as far as like what his idea of the conception was, the only thing we ever really heard was like he did agree that like, okay, Ukraine, you are going to give up some territory, but we
Yeah.
never got details on like what territory to what extent. Are we going to like freeze the front lines on like where they're at right now? I mean, and then like it's one of those situations where it's like, I mean, we said this before too. We'll find out probably a lot more in like 6 months. We'll probably find out everything in like a couple of years, and then
Oh
like
yeah.
a decade from now, we'll get like the classified files. I'll be like, okay, this was what. So this has been such like a gray kind of cloudy thing. Like I really don't know because there's evidence on for like both arguments, and it's I think honestly like the simplest thing, the Occam's razor here would be like, like we just said, like he talked to different people last, and that's kind of what shaped policy is as it stands at the moment.
I think about it and I'm like, I could totally see that issue with Zelensky and Trump not being staged exactly, but being like, I'm not saying intentful, but like I could see Trump being like, "Hey, I need to create a rift between them. That way, I can see if I can get a deal from Putin, and then that didn't happen. You know, like he obviously insulted Zelensky. They were looking for the right time, and then all that stuff happened. The mineral deal, blah blah blah, and then he tries to go back to Putin and be like, hey, look, like hey, I'm getting them to move on stuff. Like we can get a deal. You can trust us. Blah 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 blah. And I think Putin was like, no. And I think that's when Trump was like, all right, fuck it. Like we're gonna have to start getting weapons out here and start doing this.
Like,
Go ahead.
I think one thing
I think that was like planned. Like they're like, hey,
yeah.
like let's manipulate Zelensky to do these things so that we can get see if we can get a good position.
And then too, like one thing when like you brought up the mineral deal, I'd completely forgot about that. Like I think it was either in June, it may have been June or July. Like the Russians actually captured like the mines that were specified in that mineral.
Oh yeah, yeah.
So that may have been a factor as well. It's like, well, shit.
Well, I mean, and I said the mineral deal, but I was like thinking, I was like, I probably should have put in like air quotes here, because I was like, if I remember right, even like the deal didn't go into effect until like the war stopped. Um, there's only just like kind of preliminary stuff happening. Like there's no actual minerals being handed over, right? It's kind of like, hey, like you guys are gonna have some rights to these things over here.
Yeah,
And and the whole point of it was, yeah, like, hey, we need to have a deal over here so that the United States people are like, oh, okay, like we need to be invested in Ukraine. But it's like, it's kind of like a farce, right? Basically.
yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it's interesting. Like I think this Putin angle, I'll be honest, like I kind of put it to the side a little bit. I think at the beginning, obviously, like back with Iran and all that other kind of stuff. But I feel like now it's kind of back in the forefront, and I don't know. I don't know where it kind of goes from here because I don't think Ukraine's got any more, you know, uh, oomph to do anything. I mean, you've talked about their people and their conscription issues, all that kind of stuff, and you have those issues. It's like I don't think us giving you jets is going to change anything. I mean, I think Russia put up a thing today saying that they're conscripting 150,000 more people. And it's like, okay, like it doesn't seem like anything's really changed, with this group, but it seems to be more intense than in what it was before. And I don't know, I don't kind of understand why that is yet.
I mean, it could be a situation too, because like Trump had been like I know the other day it was like I can't remember how he phrased it, but something like they had got like some sort of intelligence or something. So like I kind of do wonder if it's kind of a deal of like you don't want you kind of like you can't win, but you don't want them to actually win. Like kind of keep it from like
Getting
if
out
you
of control.
yeah maybe not necessarily deny control, but it's kind of like make it like if we're gonna lose, let's make sure they also lose. Kind of a situation where it's like okay. We can't really beat you at this point, but if we pump enough weapons in there, we might be able to make the cost high enough to where it's kind of like keep it as a stalemate, and kind of like maybe we could kind of get to where you're stuck where you're currently at, and that's where we kind of leave it up.
But see, that's where I'm like, okay, like I think this goes into the game theory part of it, where it's like, I don't think I don't think Putin's going to be like, okay, now that I got more of what I want, I'll give you a better deal.
Yeah,
And that's why I never understood. Like, I always thought, I'm like, this technically is supposed to be the best deal you're going to get from him because you've got much more leverage than you will later. And so I never understood why it's like, you know, I never understood the argument where it's like, okay, well, we're gonna try to wait them out and just kind of make this a stalemate or maybe lighten the hit we're gonna take and stuff like that. I'm like, I never understood that because I'm like, well, but the alternative is just making a deal and getting more of what you want now than that. Right? So it's like, is it a pride thing at this point where it's like that's why they're not wanting to come to a deal? Or what is it? Because the best deal you're gonna get is what you're gonna get now because the end is damn near inevitable. I mean the
yeah,
only way the only way I could see the situation in Ukraine going dramatically the other way is if for some reason Europe gets involved militarily. And I just don't think they're gonna do that.
Yeah, like I've seen a lot of Ukrainians. Like, there's definitely been like a sea change on that in the last like couple of weeks because it's like the whole drone situation recently. We've not really brought it up in this
Yeah,
episode.
with Poland
Yeah, and like
and
Denmark.
Estonia, right?
Yeah, and Estonia, and like they were putting out a lot of tough announcements. They even told Ukrainians like, "Why are you guys even doing this? Like, we all know you're not actually going to do anything." So it's like
Yeah.
there is kind of like a sense of just like, it's stalemate probably will be the best we can get out. This is kind of the viewpoint I'm seeing, but yeah, I think in general. To your point, like Mark Milley back in like late 22 said the exact same thing. Like he was actually pushing to get like some sort of agreement then, and he
Yeah.
kind of got overruled. Like I
Well, I mean,
know,
that's what a lot of, a lot of liberals that I've heard, who are very anti-war, they go all the way back to Biden in like the first 2 months after the war or whatever it was. There's the Istanbul talks or whatever it
yeah,
was. So like, I mean, I think that's all. I think depending on where this lands, that's going to be the conversation. When should they have gotten out, and what was the realistic, possibility that they would be able to get out, right? Like, would
yeah,
they really have been able to get a deal 2 months ago or not? And I think, or 2 months after the war started, I just don't know. And I think that's going to be the biggest lesson. I feel like that's always the biggest lesson when you lose. It's like, well, when should we have stopped? You know?
yeah. The consensus I've seen, if you wanted to like maximize like the Western position, yeah, Milley in like late 22 after like the Ukrainian offensives, like that would probably be the best point if you wanted to minimize the human toll. Then yeah, like the Istanbul Agreement probably would have been the best deal. But
Yeah.
like on net, the Russians have taken more territory since then. Like we went from like I think it was Milley actually in like November of 22 was like so there's been like 100,000 guys on like both sides like killed or wounded. I think at this point we probably need to go ahead and like call it. And like now it's like we're well over 1 million casualties combined for both sides at this point. So it's like the front lines are not. I mean, like obviously the Russians have taken more territory, but it's not like it's dramatically changed in either direction. So it's kind of like really you got nothing out of extending this war. Like Ukraine's exhausted. The Russians are still kind of there. I mean, obviously, like the advance is slow, but it's just like obviously from the things we're seeing right now, it's kind of like that may change soon if something doesn't give. So it's like I do think there might be like the word you're looking for. You're talking about pride. It might be like a sunk cost kind of thing at this point where it's like
Yeah.
we put so much into this, and if we fail, like it'll be like not just like face, but it's also like strategic positions. Because I do know, I think it was last year Biden was even talking like, yeah, if like Ukraine completely collapses, like all of a sudden you're going to have like the Russians. Not only will they be on the borders, but they can kind of mess around with stuff in the Balkans and stuff because like they got close relationships with like Serbia and stuff. So it's I think there is starting to be kind of a panic of like, okay, like we either got to get a deal or we got to like do something here because if like they fully win, then that's hugely disastrous.
Yeah. Interesting. Well, let's go ahead and end it there. I gotta get up early in the morning, but I think it's really interesting, and I think the state of play, I feel like, is continuing to escalate, and I'm curious to see kind of where we land, and what conflict is going to be the first to give, or the first one to be resolved. So, only time will tell, but I think it's a good place to end it.
All right.
Great stuff, y'all. Good
Good stuff,
stuff.
boys.
Hopefully, we can do another one soon here too on government shutdown stuff.
Oh yeah,
Yeah, that'd be a good one, dude. That'd be a really good one.
Let's do one this weekend.
I'm down.
All right, let's do this week. All right, listen, y'all be safe. I'm
See you
gonna
guys.
stop here.
See you guys.